6. Administration and governance under the Shungas. 6.1 Nature of the Shunga administration. The Shunga Empire inherited much of the administrative machinery from the Mauryan Empire, but modified it according to their needs. The centralized bureaucracy of the Mauryas weakened. Feudal elements, local rulers, feudatories gained prominence. Military power became the most important tool for holding the empire together. The Shungas governed in a quasi-feudal system, where loyalty of local rulers and generals was crucial for maintaining authority. Central authority. The emperor, Samrat, remained the supreme authority, but real power often depended on control of key urban centers like Pataliputra and Vidisha, military backing of generals and governors, support from the Brahmanical priesthood. The Shunga king was the chief executive, chief priest, and chief military commander. Roles merged under his leadership. Unlike the Mauryan system, where officials like the Amatyas and Mahamitras had strong bureaucratic powers, under the Shungas, these positions declined in importance. Provincial administration. The empire was divided into provinces, each governed by viceroys, kumara or regional governors, feudatory kings, samantas, loyal to the Shunga emperor, military governors in frontier zones. Each province enjoyed relative autonomy but had to provide troops in case of war, tribute and taxes to the central government. This loose arrangement made the empire flexible but also fragile, as provincial loyalty could easily falter. The military organization. Since external threats and internal revolts were constant, the Shunga military was one of the strongest features of their governance. Composition of the army. The Shunga army included infantry, Padati, the bulk of the army, cavalry, Ashvasena, fast-moving units critical for patrolling large regions, chariots, Rathasena. Though chariots were declining in importance, they still served ceremonial and strategic roles. Elephant corps, Hastisena. War elephants remained a fearsome component of Indian armies. Naval forces, possibly used along riverine routes like the Ganges, but there is little direct evidence. The size of the army was likely smaller than the massive Mauryan forces, but it was highly mobile and battle-hardened. 4.2 Military reforms. Pushyamitra and his successors emphasized professional soldiers rather than conscripted peasants. Creation of a hereditary warrior class among the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas. Fortifications around major cities like Pataliputra and Vidisha. Defense became the primary focus of government expenditure. 5. Law and justice. 6.5.1 Legal principles. Law under the Shungas was based primarily on dharma, cosmic law, and traditional customs. Sources of law included Smriti texts like Manusmriti, Vedic injunctions, local customs. The king acted as the supreme judge in important cases, while local councils handled routine disputes. Types of offenses. Major offenses included treason against the emperor, rebellion by feudatories, religious blasphemy, especially against Brahmanical institutions, theft, murder, and property crimes. Punishments were often severe, especially for crimes against the state. Economy and revenue system. 6.6.1 Land revenue. The land tax remained the main source of revenue. Agricultural prosperity was critical, especially in the Gangetic Plains and Malwa region. 6.6.2 Trade and commerce. Despite political instability, trade thrived. Cities like Vidisha, Pataliputra, and Kaushambi were vibrant trade hubs. Trade with the Indo-Greek kingdoms, Central Asia, and even Southeast Asia continued. Export items included textiles, beads, spices, ivory, and metal goods. 6.6.3 Coinage. The Shungas issued punch-marked coins and early cast coins, depicted symbols like bulls, lions, swastikas, and trees. Some coins also show Greek influences, hinting at cultural exchanges. The monetary system remained rudimentary, but facilitated local and regional trade effectively. Religious policies and public works. 6.7.1 Patronage of Hindu temples. Shunga rulers constructed and renovated temples dedicated to Vedic deities like Vishnu and Shiva. Early structural temples began to appear during this time. 6.7.2 Buddhist sites. Although Shungas are sometimes accused of persecuting Buddhists, many important Buddhist monuments were either built or expanded during their reigns. For example, Sanchi Stupa renovations took place under Shunga patronage. Bharhut Stupa shows sculptures from the Shunga period. Thus, the Shungas seem to allow religious diversity, though with clear favor toward Brahmanism. 7. Art, architecture, and culture under the Shungas. The Shunga period c. 185 BCE, 73 BCE, marked a cultural renaissance in ancient India. Although political unity declined compared to the Mauryas, artistic creativity, literary activity, and religious expression flourished as never before. The Shungas were great patrons of Brahmanical Hinduism, yet they also supported Buddhist art, leading to a dynamic and colorful cultural atmosphere. 1. Shunga art, a distinctive style. Shunga art is characterized by intricate detailing, realistic human and animal figures, a strong narrative tradition depicting stories and religious scenes, use of red sandstone and local materials. Compared to the more geometric and formal Mauryan art, Shunga art is livelier, more naturalistic and emotionally expressive. 1.1 Themes in Shunga art. Common themes included religious scenes, Buddhist Jataka tales, Hindu mythologies, nature motifs, trees, lotuses, lions, bulls, peacocks, human figures, yakshas, nature spirits, royal figures, warriors, women in elaborate dresses. Narrative storytelling. Early panels show continuous narrative scenes carved in relief. 7. To architecture, early temples and stupas. 7.2.1 Expansion of stupas. Stupas, Buddhist sacred mounds, reached an advanced stage of development during the Shunga era. Two of the most important sites are A. The Great Stupa at Sanchi. Originally built during Ashoka's reign, the Sanchi Stupa was expanded and decorated under the Shungas. Additions included stone railings, vedikas with exquisite carvings, toranas, ornamental gateways decorated with mythological and everyday life scenes, motifs like elephants, horses, scenes from Buddha's life, and even early versions of Hindu deities were carved. The Sanchi complex represents a fusion of Buddhist piety and folk artistic tradition. B. Bharhut Stupa. The Bharhut Stupa in Madhya Pradesh is another major Shunga monument, famous for its detailed narrative panels depicting Jataka tales, stories of the Buddha's previous lives, scenes of worship, royal processions. Inscriptions identify donors, monks, nuns, lay devotees, showing widespread patronage. Bharhut also displays early anthropomorphic representations, hinting at the move towards showing Buddha in human form. 222. Early temple architecture. Evidence of early Hindu temples begins under the Shungas. These were mostly wooden structures, now lost, but stone foundations remain. Early temple models show rectangular sanctuaries, garbhagriha, simple pillared halls, decorative motifs inspired by nature. These primitive temples laid the foundation for later Gupta-era temple architecture. Sculpture and decorative arts. 7.3 Fun sculptures of yakshas and yakshis. Yaksha, male, and yakshi, female figures were extremely popular in Shunga art. Large freestanding sculptures in stone show robust bodies, detailed jewelry, lively, sensual expressions. These figures served as guardians of fertility and nature, and were often placed in religious complexes. Tree point. Terracotta figurines. Terracotta art reached high sophistication. Figures depicted women adorned with elaborate headdresses, warriors, animals, and birds. These were mass-produced, suggesting an active urban culture with a flourishing artisan class. Painting and mural traditions. While no paintings from the Shunga period survive directly, indirect evidence suggests wall paintings may have adorned temples and palaces. Wooden structures might have been brightly painted. References in later Sanskrit texts hint at a tradition of narrative mural paintings. 7.5 Literature and language. The Shunga period was a golden age for Sanskrit drama and literature. 1. Sanskrit revival. Sanskrit became the dominant language of elite culture again, after the more Prakrit-oriented Mauryan period. Early Sanskrit prose and drama developed. 7.5.2 Rise of dramatic literature. Kalidasa's Malavikagnimitram, though written later, is set in the Shunga court. It shows that courtly drama and storytelling traditions were already maturing under Shunga influence. 7.5.3 Buddhist literary activity. Buddhist monks composed early versions of Jataka tales, Avadanas, moral stories, Buddhacharita, life of Buddha, later fully developed under Ashvaghosha. The mixing of Brahmanical, Buddhist, and folk traditions led to a rich literary culture. Religious culture, 7.61 Brahmanical Renaissance. Revival of Vedic rituals like the Ashvamedha, horse sacrifice. Promotion of Vishnu, Shiva, and Durga worship. Early representations of Hindu gods in sculpture appear. 7.6.2 Buddhist and Jain traditions. Despite Brahmanical dominance, Buddhism continued to flourish, especially in the Deccan and central India. Early Jain communities also prospered. This era shows a dynamic interplay between different religions, often influencing each other's artistic forms. Foreign relations of the Shunga Empire. The Shunga Empire, c. 185-73 BCE, emerged during a time of great geopolitical turbulence. Foreign threats, particularly from the northwest, posed constant challenges, while diplomacy and warfare shaped the empire's external relationships. The Shungas maintained a complex foreign policy, sometimes militaristic, sometimes diplomatic, always pragmatic. The Indo-Greek threat. One of the most persistent external challenges to the Shunga Empire was posed by the Indo-Greek kingdoms. 1.1 Background. After the death of Alexander the Great, his successors, the Diadochi, split his empire. The easternmost fragment was the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, which soon extended into northwestern India. Demetrius I, 3 c. 200 BCE, and his successors invaded deep into Indian territory, capturing parts of Punjab and possibly reaching the Ganges Valley. Puranas. The Greeks tried to capture Pataliputra, the imperial capital. However, Pushyamitra's forces successfully defended the heartland. Later kings, particularly Vasumitra, fought wars against Indo-Greek intrusions. A famous incident describes Vasumitra protecting a Shunga Ashvamedha horse from Greek attacks, a sign of military valor. 1.3 Diplomatic relations. Despite wars, evidence also points to diplomatic exchanges. The famous Heliodorus pillar at Vidisha was erected by Heliodorus, an ambassador from the Indo-Greek king Antiochidas, to the Shunga king Bhagabhadra. Heliodorus declared himself a devotee of Vasudeva, Krishna, suggesting religious and cultural exchanges beyond mere conflict. This shows that even amidst hostility, treaties, embassies, and religious diplomacy were active. Relations with Central Asian tribes. 8.2.1 Sakas, Scythians. During the late Shunga period, Scythian tribes, called Sakas in Indian sources, began migrating into western India. Though the major Saka invasions came after the fall of the Shungas, their pressure was already felt in the northwest. The Shungas had to maintain vigilance against these semi-nomadic invaders. 2.2 Yavanas and other groups. Yavana was the Indian term for Greeks and later for various foreign peoples. Indo-Greek settlements and garrisons dotted northwestern India. A cosmopolitan frontier zone emerged. Greek influence seeped into Indian coinage, artistic styles, religious practices. Thus, the Shungas were ruling a pluralistic region where foreign cultures interacted with indigenous traditions. Relations with southern India. Although the Shunga Empire's main focus was in the north and central regions, contacts with southern kingdoms also existed. The Shungas maintained trade relations with the Satavahanas and possibly with early Tamil polities. Cholas, Cheras, Pandyas. Goods like spices, precious stones, textiles, and pearls flowed northward from the south. There is no evidence of direct military campaigns into the deep south by the Shungas, suggesting relations were largely economic. For maritime trade and foreign commerce. 8.4.1 Indian Ocean trade. Indian traders under Shunga rule participated in Indian Ocean commerce. Ports along the eastern coast, Bay of Bengal, and western coast, Arabian Sea, prospered. Trade routes connected India with Sri Lanka, Tamraparni, Southeast Asia, especially Suvarnabhumi and the Land of Gold, possibly even contacts with the Roman Mediterranean via intermediaries. 4.2 Silk Road beginnings. Though the Silk Road became fully active later, Early stages of overland trade between India, Central Asia, and China began during the Shunga period. Horse trade, silk, and precious goods passed through these ancient highways. Thus, even if militarily defensive, the Shungas were part of a globalizing ancient economy. Impact of foreign contacts, foreign interactions led to artistic syncretism. Indo-Greek art styles influenced Indian sculpture and coinage. Religious blending. Greek ambassadors adopting Hindu practices like Heliodorus show religious exchanges. Language evolution. Prakrit, Sanskrit, and Greek terms intermixed in commercial and cultural life. This cosmopolitan environment enriched Indian civilization, even as the Shungas tried to preserve native traditions. Religious developments during the Shunga period. The Shunga Empire, c. 185 BCE, 73 BCE, played a significant role in shaping the religious landscape of ancient India. While Brahmanical Hinduism emerged as the dominant force, Buddhism and Jainism also received royal patronage. The religious developments during this period not only influenced the politics of the time, but also had lasting effects on Indian society, art, and culture. 1. Brahmanical Hinduism, the revival 9.1.1 Rise of Brahmanism. The Shunga dynasty's most significant religious contribution was the revival and consolidation of Brahmanical Hinduism. Unlike the Mauryas, who were more tolerant and inclusive of various religious traditions, the Shungas were more explicitly Brahmanical in their patronage. Pushyamitra Shunga and his successors actively sponsored Vedic rituals, the most notable of which was the Ashvamedha, horse sacrifice. The Shunga kings sought to establish their legitimacy by aligning with the Brahmanical priesthood, whose authority provided divine sanction for their rule. 9.1.2 Temple building and worship practices. Temple construction became more widespread during this period, especially for the worship of Vishnu, Shiva, and Durga. The Shungas encouraged the worship of gods connected to fertility, nature, and war. Vishnu in particular became central, with representations of the god becoming common in art. Shiva, often depicted as the linga, also gained importance. Durga, in her fierce form, began to be venerated, symbolizing the triumph of good over evil. The construction of temples during the Shunga period marked the early stages of a tradition that would blossom in the Gupta period. 3 Vedic rituals and Brahmanical texts. The Ashvamedha sacrifice was perhaps the most important ritual that the Shunga rulers revived. Pushyamitra Shunga is believed to have performed an Ashvamedha sacrifice, symbolizing the power and authority of his regime. Brahmanical texts, such as the Manusmriti, were promoted during this period. These texts outlined social duties and the Varna system, the division of society into Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. The Shungas thus played a crucial role in reinforcing social hierarchies and the primacy of the priestly class. Buddhism, patronage, and persecution. Buddhism, though a minority religion during the Shunga period, continued to flourish in many parts of India. However, the relationship between the Shungas and Buddhism was complex, marked by both patronage and persecution. 1. The role of Pushyamitra Shunga. According to later Buddhist texts, Pushyamitra Shunga is believed to have persecuted Buddhists and destroyed Buddhist monasteries. The Mahavamsa, a Sri Lankan chronicle, claims that Pushyamitra ordered the destruction of Buddhist stupas and monuments. He may have restricted the activities of Buddhists in some areas, but there is no conclusive evidence of widespread persecution. However, these accounts could also be exaggerations by later Buddhist historians seeking to portray the Shungas in a negative light. 2. Buddhist monuments and art. Despite the alleged persecution, the Shungas continued to support Buddhism in certain ways, especially through the construction and expansion of Buddhist monuments. The Sanchi Stupa, one of the most famous Buddhist monuments, saw significant expansion under Shunga patronage. The Toranas, gateways at Sanchi, decorated with narrative reliefs from the Buddha's life, are among the finest examples of Buddhist art from this era. The Barhut Stupa, another significant site, was also renovated and decorated with reliefs of the Buddha's life, often commissioned by Buddhist lay devotees. 9.2.3 Buddhist texts and scholarship. The Shunga period also saw the continuation of Buddhist scholarship. The Jataka tales, stories of the Buddha's past lives, were compiled during this time. Buddhist monks and scholars continued to write and teach, preserving Buddhist doctrines and philosophies despite political challenges. The Buddhist community continued to flourish in southeastern India and the Deccan, where the Shunga influence was weaker. Jainism, steady growth. While Jainism was never as powerful as Buddhism or Brahmanism during the Shunga period, it too saw a gradual rise. 3. Jain patronage. The Shungas, while mainly promoting Brahmanism, did not entirely ignore Jainism. Jain monks received patronage from local rulers in some regions, especially in northwestern India. Jain temples, though not as widely built as Hindu temples, began to appear more frequently during the Shunga period. 9.3.2 Jain art. Jain art during the Shunga period, though less well documented, may have included carvings and sculptures in caves and temples. These early representations of Tirthankaras, spiritual teachers, were mostly aesthetic in the form of stone reliefs. 9.4 Folk religions and tribal worship. The Shunga period also saw the continued practice of folk religions and tribal beliefs, particularly in rural areas. Animism, the worship of natural elements, was common in areas outside the major urban centers. Yakshas and Yakshis, nature spirits, were venerated widely, as evidenced by the numerous sculptures of these deities from the Shunga period. These deities were often represented in local art, carved on stone pillars and in terracotta figurines. The Shunga legacy and religion. While the Shunga rulers are often remembered for their patronage of Brahmanism, they were also part of a larger religious environment that included the revival of Vedic rituals, the flourishing of Buddhism, and the steady growth of Jainism. The artistic and architectural contributions of the Shungas, particularly in Buddhist monuments, left a lasting impact on the religious landscape of India. Q. The decline and fall of the Shunga Empire. The decline and eventual collapse of the Shunga Empire, c. 185 BCE, 73 BCE, is a complex and multifaceted process. This section will explore the various internal and external factors that contributed to the downfall of the Shungas, marking the end of their rule and the transition to the Kushan and Indo-Scythian dominions in northern India. Internal weaknesses. 10.1.1 Dynastic instability. Like many ancient empires, the Shungas suffered from dynastic instability. The lack of a strong succession system and infighting among the ruling family weakened the empire from within. After the death of Pushyamitra Shunga, the empire passed into the hands of his successors. However, many of these rulers were weak and lacked the military and political acumen of Pushyamitra. Bureaucratic inefficiency also led to corruption in governance, further eroding the state's ability to control the vast territories it once held. 10.1.2 Decline in central authority. As the empire expanded and more territories came under Shunga control, maintaining effective centralized governance became increasingly difficult. The provincial governors began to act with greater autonomy, and the Shunga emperors had less control over them. Regional revolts started to rise, with local rulers seeking to carve out their own independent territories. Royal family divisions led to conflict over the throne, which further weakened the central authority. 10.1.3 Economic strain. The Shunga economy, though initially prosperous, began to face significant strain. Overextension of military campaigns put pressure on the state's treasury. Trade routes, once vibrant, became less secure due to growing instability in the northwestern regions. Rising tax burdens on the peasantry contributed to social unrest. The declining agricultural output and reduced international trade affected the empire's financial stability. External threats. 10.2 1 Indo-Scythian and Indo-Greek invasions. After the fall of the Mauryas, the Shungas faced continuous threats from Indo-Greek and Indo-Scythian invaders from the northwest. By the time of the later Shunga rulers, the Indo-Scythian, Saka kingdoms had gained substantial power in northwestern India, further eroding Shunga authority. In particular, the Indo-Greeks, weakened after the defeat by the Shungas, still posed a lingering threat. The Scythian invasions in the 2nd century BCE, led by Mithridates I, began pushing further southward, capturing key regions in the northwest. 10.2.2 Sakas and the Western Territories. As the Saka kings expanded their domains into Shunga territories, the empire's frontiers shrank. The Saka invasion weakened the empire's control over the northwestern regions, Punjab and Gandhara. These incursions contributed to the dissolution of Shunga authority in the northwest, allowing the Sakas to take control of important trade routes and urban centers. The Shungas' failure to fend off these external invaders led to the empire's gradual disintegration. The final blow, the murder of Devabhuti 10.3.1, the end of the Shunga dynasty. The last Shunga emperor, Devabhuti, is often considered the final blow to the dynasty. According to the Buddhist texts, Devabhuti was an ineffectual ruler who lost control over his administration. He was despised for his weak leadership. Court intrigues and power struggles led to his assassination by his own palace official, Brihadratha, who had grown disillusioned with the monarchy's incompetence. The assassination of Devabhuti marked the official end of the Shunga dynasty in 73 BCE, 10-3.2. The rise of the Kanva dynasty. After Devabhuti's death, Brihadratha briefly took power. However, he was overthrown by his own general, Vasudeva Kanva, who established the Kanva dynasty. The Kanvas were a short-lived dynasty, but they marked the end of the Shunga era and the beginning of a new phase in Indian history. While the Kanvas were not able to restore the Shunga Empire's former grandeur, their rise symbolized the collapse of centralized power in the Ganges Valley and the disintegration of the Shunga polity. 10.4 Social and cultural consequences. 10.4.1 The loss of centralized power. The disintegration of Shunga rule led to the emergence of smaller kingdoms and independent city-states in northern India. With the end of Shunga power, the emergence of the Kushans, Indo-Greeks, and Indo-Scythians began to reshape the political landscape. 4.2 Religious changes. The decline of the Shunga Empire also had significant religious implications. The revival of Brahmanism under the Shungas slowly gave way to the rise of Buddhism as it found new patrons in the Kushan Empire. Jainism continued to thrive, though it remained a secondary religion in the larger Indian subcontinent. The religious landscape became more diverse as these new empires introduced their own deities, rituals, and philosophies. 4.33 Artistic decline and transition. The decline of the Shunga Empire also saw the end of the great artistic achievements of the period. The grand stupas at Sanchi and Parhut began to show signs of neglect. However, the artistic traditions and architectural styles of the Shunga period laid the foundation for the Kushan art that would later flourish. 10. The aftermath. Transition to new empires. After the fall of the Shungas, the political vacuum was filled by new powers. The Kushans, under Kanishka, would later dominate much of northern India, bringing significant cultural and religious transformations. The Indo-Scythians also expanded their rule, further fragmenting the Indian subcontinent. However, the Shunga period left a lasting legacy in art, religion, and administration. It played a key role in shaping the next stage of Indian civilization. 11. The legacy of the Shunga Empire. Though the Shunga Empire was relatively short-lived, its legacy endured long after its fall in 73 BCE. The Shungas played a pivotal role in the political, religious, and cultural development of India. Their influence extended far beyond their reign, and their legacy can be seen in subsequent empires, religious traditions, and artistic achievements. 1. Political legacy. Influence on successor dynasties. 11.1. The rise of the Kanva dynasty. The Shunga Empire's collapse led directly to the Kanva dynasty, which briefly ruled northern India after the Shungas. Although the Kanvas were not as powerful, they continued many of the political structures and policies that the Shungas had established. The Kanvas inherited the administrative framework created by the Shungas, including their taxation system, royal courts, and military structures. The Kushans later followed suit, establishing bureaucratic structures that were influenced by earlier Shunga practices, particularly in their capital city of Peshawar. 11.12 Kushan influenced the Kushan Empire, c. 30 CE, 375 CE, would build on the political foundation set by the Shungas, absorbing many aspects of Shunga governance. The Kushans, under Kanishka, inherited the administrative and military model of the Shungas. ensuring the stability of the northwestern region. The Shunga influence can also be seen in the Kushan art and their religious policies. While the Kushans expanded their empire to encompass much of Central Asia and northern India, they continued some of the cultural traditions initiated by the Shungas. 2. Religious legacy. Influence on Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. 11.2.1. The revival of Hinduism. The Shungas are credited with the revival of Brahmanical Hinduism, which would flourish in the centuries following their reign. The Vedic rituals and sacred texts that the Shungas sponsored laid the groundwork for the later Gupta period, when Hinduism would reach its golden age. The Shunga period is often seen as a precursor to the Gupta dynasty, which would see the complete establishment of Hinduism as the dominant religious force in India. 11.2.2. Buddhism's resilience. Although the Shungas were perceived as antagonistic toward Buddhism, the period under their rule also saw Buddhist monuments like the stupas at Sanchi and Bharhut being expanded, which became central to Buddhist worship. Buddhist art and architecture continued to flourish, particularly in the Kushan period, which was greatly influenced by Shunga-era artistic traditions. Buddhist patronage was restored by the Kushans, especially under Kanishka, who made Buddhism a state religion and promoted its spread into Central Asia, China, and beyond. 11.2.3. Jainism's endurance. Though the Shungas were primarily supporters of Brahmanical Hinduism, Jainism also benefited from the period's religious pluralism. Jain religious traditions, including the worship of Tirthankaras and the establishment of Jain temples, continued to evolve during the Shunga rule. The Kanva dynasty and later Kushan rulers also supported Jainism, allowing the religion to survive and thrive during their rule. 11.3. Artistic and cultural legacy. 11.3.1. Buddhist art and architecture. The Shunga Empire is known for its contributions to Buddhist art, particularly in the construction and decoration of stupas and gateways, Toranas. These artistic achievements had a lasting impact on Indian Buddhist architecture. The Sanchi Stupa is perhaps the most iconic monument from the Shunga period. Its elaborate reliefs of the Buddha's life and teachings became a model for later Buddhist art, especially in the Kushan Empire. The Bharhut Stupa also serves as a key example of Shunga-era sculpture, where the narrative reliefs depict the Buddha's life and Jataka tales in intricate detail. These early forms of stone carving and narrative reliefs would influence the Kushan art, which took these styles to an even greater scale. 11.3.2. Hindu temple architecture. The Shungas also played a role in the development of Hindu temple architecture, particularly in the construction of small shrines dedicated to gods like Vishnu, Shiva, and Durga. The early temples from the Shunga period served as precursors to the grand temple complexes built during the Gupta period, showcasing an early form of iconographic representation of Hindu deities. 11.3.3. Literary contributions. Although the Shunga period is primarily known for its political and religious history, the arts were still flourishing. Sanskrit literature continued to evolve, with some evidence suggesting the emergence of early plays and poetry during this period. The Mahakavyas, epic poetry, that would later become a hallmark of Indian literature, found their early roots in this period. 11. For administrative legacy, centralization and bureaucracy. The Shunga Empire's administrative structures served as models for later rulers, especially in their centralized bureaucracy and military organization. The Shunga rulers maintained a well-organized system of local administration, with governors managing territories on behalf of the emperor. This system was later inherited by Kushan rulers. The taxation systems and the promotion of trade that flourished under the Shungas were also important precedents for later Indian empires. 11.5. Influence on the transition to the Gupta period. The fall of the Shunga Empire set the stage for the rise of the Gupta Empire, EC 320 CE, often considered the golden age of Indian civilization. While the Shungas were more focused on preserving Vedic traditions and promoting Brahmanical Hinduism, the Guptas would carry forward and refine these traditions, leading to the flourishing of Hindu culture, art, and governance. The Shungas, with their religious revival and contributions to early Indian art, provided a cultural bridge between the Maurya Empire and the later Gupta dynasty.